Ladies and gentlemen, I think you would all agree that I say these has been 3 very intense days, 3 very content-rich days. I think we took a lot of information with us, and we will continue to do so and try to put the icing on the cake, if you will, now with the very final panel of CyFy 2019. And it is a very critical issue. It is a very timely issue that we will be looking at now for the very final panel, protecting the vote, electoral integrity. Now, with us are outstanding individuals, some of whose countries had recent elections, so this is very timely, and I'm very much looking forward to hear from them. Right to my immediate right, she's the Secretary General of the World Leadership Alliance, the Club-de-Madrid. Of course, delighted to have Maria Elena Agüero with us. Great to have you, Maria. Right next to Shay Zandani, who's a principal at KPMG, based in New York City and in charge of cyber and a cyber expert in that particular regard. So great to have you with us. Also here is Donara Barojan. She's an information warfare expert and has just launched a very intriguing, interesting startup, which you will speak to about in just a minute. We have Rema Rajeshwari with us, and she's the district police chief of the Telangana State Police in India. And of course, for those of you who are familiar with India, you know that there have been some unfortunate incidents, particularly with mobbing and lynch mobbing concerns. So very much looking forward to hear your insights and what we can learn from those experiences. And of course, last but not least, a gentleman who certainly needs no introduction, our host and beloved individual, Samir Saran. Always great to see you. I think we can all give him a hand, yes. Samir brought his, as always, brought his own fan club. Always very much appreciated. That's good to hear. And Samir, let me actually start with you. India, of course, just had a massive election, one that was observed and followed by millions, if not billions, of people worldwide. We've been talking now for the better part of the last 2 years about the US election. It still left its mark about the election of Donald Trump and how that came about with the aiding of Russians and bots and so on and so forth. Did you observe any tampering, any online, any cyber tampering, any external tampering in the Indian election?
I think that's, thank you for that wonderful introduction to the panel and to the session. And even though I am guilty of designing or partly designing this agenda, I think probably we framed it wrong. I think the question should have been not protecting the vote, but protecting democracy or protecting regimes or protecting governments. I think what the question here is that are we at a time when the regime stability is at question because of the tools available to all sorts of actors. Now, many of those are internal actors, but certainly external actors have those toolkit available with them as well. So to answer your question, 9 months ago, I had, we had, or maybe a year ago, there was a scandal that Cambridge Analytica was apparently gathering personal information and choices and behavioral patterns and feeding that to a political party, and I'm looking at Priyanka here, her ex-party, for shaping outcomes. So I don't know whether there was external interference, but my question is that if Cambridge Analytica can do this for an Indian political party, why is it difficult for Cambridge Analytica to serve any actor in the world who has the capability to buy that service? So I think the question is not whether there was external interference. The question has 3 short edges to it, which I want to mention. The first, have we created a system and have our political parties created a system where there is a marketplace for gathering information and processing information and thereafter using it to influence consumer choice? Pretty much like the marketing companies do. It's not a new thing the political parties are doing. But the question here is the scale and velocity, and that disturbs some people. It's not new. It's been done ever since any form of regimes were created. It is going to continue post the Indian elections and the elections thereafter. But I think that's the central question. is having an unregulated marketplace where personal information and choice is available to people to manipulate is a good idea. And what can we do about it? Second, once you have that information, please understand, the political system is outside any regulation. The American regulators, the European regulators, the Indian regulators stipulate or demand certain behavior from big companies. They want data protection, they want privacy enforced, they want certain norms enforced. The data sets available with political parties across the world are totally unregulated. My question is, when President Obama put together that huge digital infrastructure to map every American on the map so that he could do a home-to-home canvassing, who is responsible for the protection of that data? And what happens if the next candidate is not President Obama, but President Trump 2.0 fighting as a Democrat? How will he use that data? And I think that's the question to ask, that how do political parties store, maintain, keep integrity of the data? And finally, most importantly, we were taught to believe that lies have no legs. Well, lies now have 5G. And they are pretty rapid in their spread, in their implications, and in their application. And when we are in this age where lies actually have broadband to be perpetuated and propagated, then I think the question here is that how do you create a framework where misinformation, disinformation, propaganda can be separated from facts, truth, and all of these are important parts of any political campaign. And this is not only about democracies, by the way. So I am not someone who evangelizes democracy. To each his own. Whichever may be your form of governance and government, are those regimes stable anymore? And I think that's the challenge. Regime stability is the big question when we really talk about protecting the vote.
And I think we can all agree at the end of the day, of course, new technology are in many ways a blessing, but indeed the question is, what do we do when they are turned against us, turned against the democratic values, and for the greater good, for that matter, something that Rema obviously can speak to. Rema, I just alluded to it during the introduction. You are, of course, the district police chief at the Telangana State Police in India. For those who might not be familiar with the incidents that took place there, please fill us in.
Thank you, Ali. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here. I'll give a very brief introduction about what happened last summer in the state of Telangana, where I work as the district police chief. My tryst with online misinformation started in March 2018, when one video, a deep fake, claimed 46 lives across the country. An online rumor, fueled by social media platforms, led to large-scale lynching, mob lynching in the country, and many people lost their lives. So this was for the first time, officers like me in the law enforcement, we woke up to this harsh reality where we realized that we were chasing after an enemy who had no face. And who was the enemy? Technology. Technology, like any other innovation, we know some people would like to use it to improve the lives of other human beings, and some would definitely use it to manipulate and exploit. So in this case, we saw that some of the videos that were originated and they were circulated in the local social media platforms forced people to believe in certain rumors, and they ended up killing each other. One video was on child lifting gang, and the second video was about some interstate criminal gangs out there to get to people and to kill them in the most brutal manner. So we were seeking to take help from the digital platforms back then so that we could go after the origin of these messages so that we could put a stop to them, which will put an end to the killings. But unfortunately, we couldn't do that because of the traceability question, because of the question of encryption that most of the apps have, particularly WhatsApp, which has one of the largest user base in India. Almost 200 million Indians use WhatsApp to be in touch with each other. So this was a challenge that we faced. And that being said, when it comes to integrity of elections, and when I have to talk about influence operations in the digital age, I'd like to say that most of the time, when we talk about this particular issue, we tend to believe that influence operations are out there to change what people believe by pushing in certain type of content, but my personal take is that it's not true. The influence operations are there to confirm what people already believe. You just push in content with a lot of confirmation bias and don't give them any chance to verify the veracity, the integrity of that particular piece of information. Your job is done. Human cognition is big business now. So what we have seen in terms of mob lynching, or when we have to consider examples from across the globe in terms of how elections are being manipulated, well, this kind of operations are only being used to manipulate the pre-existing beliefs which are already there in the society. The problem in the way we are fighting this issue, not just in my country, but across the world, are basically two. One, I strongly believe that all the efforts are fragmented and they're incomplete. Most of the solutions which are being proposed are independently proposed. There is no collective effort. So I strongly believe that all the stakeholders have to come together, and we have to come out with an open mind to find solutions to fight this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing these experiences and also the lessons learned, something that, of course, other cities, other countries can learn from. Donara, actually, you can pick up right there where Rema left off, because personal tax is something that, of course, you have specialized in. You are based in Lithuania. Some of the more interesting job titles that I've come across recently: information warfare expert. That looks great on a business card, I tell you that. You just recently launched a startup called Screen. Tell us what it's about.
Sure, so I haven't launched the startup, but I am a part of the startup team. And the idea behind the startup is to help the private and the public sectors identify and mitigate the cyber-enabled information operations, because those have expanded and no longer target just governments or elections or political parties. Those target everyone, including businesses, especially those that are consumer-facing. Before joining the startup, I spent 3 years working for a think tank that was researching how disinformation was affecting elections all around the world. So in the last 3 years, I've had the chance to monitor elections in North and South America, Europe, and Asia. And what we found was that the threat landscape was very similar, and if something succeeded in one country, it was very much likely to be exploited in another country that was about to have elections. From what we've seen so far, the enemy is not just technology. It sits at the intersection of three coalescing vulnerabilities: technological vulnerabilities, societal vulnerabilities, and cognitive vulnerabilities. If it just takes one video to get our communities to start killing each other, the problem is not technology that showed them the video. It's far, far more complex, and we have to appreciate the complexity of it before we can start addressing it. So the two things that we haven't really focused on as much are the societal vulnerabilities: socioeconomic inequality, religious, racial, ethnic tensions that divide us. And then those divisions can be exploited by these hostile actors that are trying to sway the public opinion or confirm what we already believe in. Another unaddressed issue are the cognitive vulnerabilities that we have. You know, that could be confirmation bias, popularity bias, and so on. So all of these things affect the way we perceive information and interact with the world around us. I actually have a slide that has 5 key lessons that I think all decision makers should learn if they want to protect elections from disinformation and cyber-enabled influence operations. So yes, we can see it already. So the first lesson is that we need to address the underlying societal, cognitive, and technological vulnerabilities. Very often when we think about influence operations, we think, you know, that we need fact-checking or that we need more media literacy, and that is true, but that will not solve the problem. It will just try and fix the symptom of it. To really solve it, we have to address the 3 vulnerabilities that I just talked about. The second key issue is to involve the civil society, the media, social media companies, private sector, and academia to solve this problem. Government action alone is not enough because it's a societal problem that targets all of us. The third key lesson is to learn from other countries' mistakes and practice your response. A lot of countries do try and prepare for information warfare attacks, but don't really practice how their response would take place and what would happen should they experience it. And as a result, they might fail because in a time-sensitive crisis situation, you need to act fast and know exactly what you need to do. The fourth lesson that I would urge everyone to learn is to follow the latest trends in digital marketing, because information and influence operations is just digital marketing that's being used against us. So we need to know what is happening in the digital marketing field and be aware of all of the latest innovations there. And the final lesson is to depoliticize the threat and stop overhyping it. So the depolitization of this threat relates to us not talking about the content as much as we talk about the dissemination of the content. Because the content that we are seeing actors that are running influence and information operations use is actually coming from our own citizens. And that's problematic because we don't want to tell our citizens that you are the problem and the content that you are sharing is leading to us not having this electoral integrity and security. So instead of looking at the content, we need to look at how it's disseminated, whether there are any coordinated inauthentic, whether there's any coordinated inauthentic activity, bots, trolls, and how are they interacting with our societies. And it's really important not to overhype it. A lot of malicious actors, state-sponsored actors such as Russia and Iranian operatives are trying to undermine our democracies by making them look weak and easy to exploit. When we say that 20 Russian operatives can sway the outcome of our elections, we are doing to ourselves more harm than good, because we are telling that someone with a very limited budget and a very limited capability can actually undermine our democracies that have been around for hundreds of years. So it's really important to understand the actual influence and impact that these information operations are having it, and ensure that we are not overhyping it and giving our citizens and our societies the best possible information for them to know that our democracies can be secured and will be safe.
Thank you so much, Donara. Don't overhype it. Well, somebody forgot to tell the Americans, I tell you that.
Exactly.
That is something that this country has been obsessing over for the past couple of years, and probably will for the next last 2 years of the first election cycle of Donald Trump. And also the second was involve civil actors, involve media, and involve private companies. And that's why, Shay, of course, you are one of these companies, KPMG. You're based in New York, have lived and worked in Israel also for many years, and are a cyber expert.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of just follow up on what you've said about elections and how people will kind of interfere elections. And I would like to relate to one of Samir's first points. Samir, if I may, it's not about defending our politician or defending our democracies, is defending our public and defending our rights. And I'd like to share with you some of my past life examples, and I hope you could kind of relate to some of them at least. In my past life, I was running a very interesting startup that was kind of identifying trends and relate to them to cyber attack and to cyber events. And we found some very interesting correlation between, let's say, the shopping season just before Christmas, Black Friday, Cyber Monday in the US, and whenever people were attacking credit card companies, retail companies. The same goes with major sports event. Whenever there's a Super Bowl, whenever there's Olympic Games, like in last Rio Olympic Games in Brazil, so there's a lot of rush around cybersecurity and people and attack vectors and used by some actors, bad actors, trying to do that. And luckily, we're identifying a very interesting phenomena, and it's easy to do that because you could track the dark web, you could track several actors, and you could see that over time there's a lot of different kind of community groups or web forums in the dark web on those specific issues. So suddenly, before the US election, presidential election 2016, we could find several events that people were trying to make bad things out there. And we've got some examples, and some of them you're absolutely familiar with. Like in June 2015, about a year before the elections, there was a huge breach of more than 4 million, it's called the Office of Personnel Military from the United States. So 4 million persons or officers, high-rank officers, some of them my best friends, got a letter from the Pentagon saying, guys, we're sorry to let you know, but those, I mean, your details and specific data was breached out. And why the heck people, or, I mean, why do they want to do that? I mean, some of the Chinese or the Russians are accused by that, but why do they need 4 million high military ranks, official military people data, besides, you know, the social security number and all that? Because they could kind of track this data, and they could use this data to extort some of those peoples about their way of life. I mean, I'm talking about all their polygraph tests and all their, whatever their military, I would say, history was there. So in the same time, a couple of months after, we could find some very interesting efforts, and that was the first time that we've kind of noticed this kind of efforts between Chinese and Russian bad actors working together on the US elections. And that was, of course, we published that. It was very interesting. We've got a lot of PR out of it, and it was very interesting. One topic which is very interesting, and I would like to mention before Maria would jump in, if it's okay with you, is that we just had an election in Israel. And one of the major parties, we've got several parties there, too many if you're asking me, but leave that aside, it's not a story for another day. But one of the major parties, smartphone, a chief of staff, he was a previous chief of staff, his name is Benny Gantz, his smartphone was breached. It was said that it was the Iranian, it was said that it was the other parties, but his smartphone was breached. Now, imagine if there are some, I'm not sure about your smartphone, but you know, I have some pictures, I have some things, and who knows. But those guys maybe have some other things about kind of agreements or any kind of, so people are trying everything they can do in order to eliminate or to interfere in those kind of stuff. And remember that, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, we were thinking that elections could be done electronically. Some of the European countries were trying to do that, and they've been canceled those processes just because of some cyber attack that jeopardized the whole process. So I'm urging you to learn more about it. We don't want a world ruled by specific groups that have some limited budget and some limited ideas, but I think it's a very interesting topic.
It's a very interesting topic indeed, and therefore very fitting that we end CyFy 2019 with this particular very timely issue. As you said, India just had a recent election, Israel just had an election. So the EU, of course, just had elections. Another election where people said other state actors were trying to meddle with. Brexit was another example where Russia keeps coming up. Now, of course, Maria, the Club-de-Madrid, of course, is trying to bolster democracies and to uphold and defend those values. If we look at all those cases that were already discussed on this particular stage, how do we build resilience then in the institutions and society? Some of our speakers have already gratefully shared lessons with us, but what would your advice be? How do we defend ourselves?
Well, democracy is the bread and butter of what my organization or the organization that I work in is occupied with. And if we're talking about building resilience, and we've been listening and talking about this for the past 2.5 days, but building resilience has to start with education. It's the longest term. It's what's going to take the longest, but that is the only, in the end, that is the only guarantee. And it's not just education in terms of school, but it's education in terms of raising awareness. It's education in terms of building the skills and the capacity to manage this new digital reality. Now, what we're talking about here, we're talking about 3 elements that are key to democracy, and again, it's democratic values and leadership that we're fostering and promoting. And it's, 1 is elections, which is essential to democracy. 2, it's information, which is essential to human rights, and it's therefore essential to democracy. And 3 is the reality that is now essential for all of us, and that's precisely technologies. Now, how do we manage these three elements in this, and this new reality? And we have to do this both at the international level, and as we've been listening, there is now interference from outside, but there's always been electoral interference from the inside. So there is nothing new in that sense. So it's a matter of learning how to address it in this new context, and when it's going to be coming from the inside and the outside, as Samir was saying earlier as well. So a lot of it will have to do with new norms. We do need new norms, and those will have to be established. Now, whether this is going to be through international agreements, international covenants, probably yes. We will need those because they will be a reference and they will give us a certain level of guarantees. But we will also need to establish and to, legal frameworks at the national level and elements that will give individuals at all three levels the tools in order to address the challenges as they arise. So yes, some of this, and I know that yesterday we said, well, are we going, or the day before, are we going, or are we listening to the same old solutions or the same old buzzwords or the same old, to a certain extent we have to. But what we have to make sure is that we realize what we are living with now, but trying to look one step further, because this is moving fast. So we're going to have to deal with it today and, foresee what answers we're going to have to be preparing and responses we're going to have to be preparing looking to the future.
Raising awareness, then of course, education. We start with education in the sense that we need more competence, media competence perhaps, in order to distinguish what is fake news and what is not. I know it's become abundantly clear that we have a great deal of expertise on the panel. I know we have a great deal of expertise in the audience, which I want to make use of in just a second. But Samir, I want to give you an opportunity to come in because you spoke first and therefore now have had the opportunity to absorb all the information and advices that the other speakers were given. What's your reaction?
I need one of you to close your mics. No worries. So I thought about the question you posed to me, and you asked me if there was external intervention in Indian elections.
You're just thinking about it now?
I thought about it.
Okay.
And it's still early days, but now since we've had a few minutes since the panel began and a few weeks since the elections ended, one thing is certain, external actors played a huge part in the Indian elections. I think the big tech companies were the biggest external actors in the Indian elections. So to say that the Indian elections were influenced by external or not influenced by external is false. I think big tech giants were omnipresent in shaping Indian decisions in these elections. They were deciding what to take down, they were deciding what to let remain, they were influencing discourse, they were promoting certain kind of content, they were allowing certain kind of proliferation of ideas. So I think certainly Indian elections 2019 was the first Indian election which was truly a global election. I think a large number of international voices, actors, companies, and agents were engaged in it. The second point I wanted to make I think that's a very important point made by both Rema and my colleague from KPMG. I think the point here is it's about publics. I think that's the important point. You are not protecting elections. You are protecting people. You are protecting our system, our way of life, our way of organizing ourselves, our societies eventually. And if mapping individual choice becomes the norm and becomes an intrusive exercise like it is fast becoming, I think you are dividing societies even before the elections are over. So in a sense, you have not only served confirmation bias, but you have also identified those who are against you forever, and there is no chance for all of us to speak post-elections that he is our common prime minister or common president. You can see that happening in the US. The Russians may not have influenced elections, and I agree with you, but I think we have missed the real impact of Russia. They have destroyed the credibility of the White House. They've had a far more profound impact on US elections than we give them credit for. It is not important whether they were responsible for 20,000 tweets or 20,000 ads or $50,000 of campaigning. It's not important. even a dollar, if it can destroy the credibility of an institution, starts impacting the way we organize ourselves. And I think that is the second impact. And luckily, on that scale, I think the Indian ecosystem was resilient. And in that sense, we don't suffer from that shroud of suspicion. I think India has moved on and looks forward to 2024 to settle the scores once again. But I am more worried about the first element. Can India be united again? Because I think the elections in the digital world, digital age, become very divisive and polarizing. And the mapping becomes permanent. Your tweets are there forever. You exist on the blogosphere. The secret ballot is over. Now it's like an open ballot system, and no one takes any prisoners. And I think that is worrisome about the stability of societies beyond just the election day.
The genie's out of the bottle in that particular case, and it's like spilled milk in that sense, can probably not be reversed. These are dangers we have to face with, and they will only be intensified in the next years to come. Let's go to the audience. Let's bring them in as quickly as possible. I know we do a round of, first round of 3 and then a second round of 3. So we collect the first gentleman. You had your hand up. Microphone is coming to you. Right there, please introduce yourself. And we're doing the first batch of 3 questions, so don't worry about it. I've already seen a number of hands up. I'll get you all in. So external factors have tainted with the microphone now as well.
Is it on? Yeah, okay. Franz Josef Berger is my name. I'm working for Moonshot CV, a company based in London who is working to disrupt violent extremism in the online space. I would have one question to Rema on the incident in 2018. I'd be interested to learn a little bit more about whether there were efforts to remove the content from the social media platforms, and how the collaboration with the tech companies how that worked and how effective the collaboration was. And then maybe to the whole panel, the question of whether anybody is aware of efforts to quantify the effect of disinformation campaigns on election results, because I appreciate very much the comment from Donara, I believe, on that it should not be overhyped. But I was wondering if we have any evidence and any figures that we can talk about in order to have an informed discussion about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you pass on the mic right to the lady in front of you? Thanks.
Well, my question would be...
Could you introduce yourself quickly?
My name is Maria Smikalova, cybersecurity expert from Russia. So you did discuss the issue of it being the matter of protecting the public and not the election themselves. But how come governments spend a lot of money on updating all the technology they have, for example, computers in Ministry of Defense or anything like that, but only a third of election infrastructure in the US operates normally, as say a lot of analysis done after the election? How come?
Thank you so much. And the final rounds, the gentleman in the back. Please pass on the mic to him. Thank you so much. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm André Michel Esungu. I work for the UN. I'm a political advisor. One comment and one question. The comment is, it would have been helpful, I suppose, although it's not easy, to have an African perspective in this debate. If only because they hold elections there too. I speak as a New Yorker because I'm based in New York. And it's important to mention that because recently, I would take 30 seconds to try to tell the story. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a country of 80 million people, they had an election and they decided for the first time to use electronic voting machines. Part of the debate among political actors was coming from the opposition, we don't want these machines because we don't trust that the government will issue the real result of the election. So the issue of integrity of the election was there, but was actually an internal issue. Then, 2 weeks ago, Facebook announced in a post that in Congo and in other countries, there were, until recently, they deleted them, a number of accounts created on Facebook, and there were bots, in fact, and were conducting the same influence campaign. So it would have been interesting, in fact, to see how that plays out in Africa. So now my question, which has nothing to do with Africa, but with the US. It's now official that actually there was an attempt or efforts to influence elections, and not only the presidential, even at the local level. My question to the panel is, where do we go from here? There are probably solutions, but from now, and you're right, Aslan, to mention it, what we hear about is the US public and all officials complaining and talking about it, hyping the thing, but we don't see the solutions. So where are the solutions and what can be learned from that from other places in the world? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you so much also for providing an example from Africa. Thank you so much. This rounds up the first batch of 3 questions. I see more hands. I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you for the second round, but let's give the panel an opportunity to respond. Rema, I think you addressed directly. Why don't you take that one?
I'll answer the first question first. There were 2 kinds of videos which led to large-scale mob lynching. The first video was a doctored educational video which originated from Karachi, Pakistan. Some non-governmental organization came up with this video because they wanted to create awareness among the parents about how to safeguard their children at the time of a child kidnapping. Somebody did a bit of doctoring, and by the time the video found its way to India, only the part where the child is being taken away by 2 persons were shown, and this video created quite a lot of trouble and ended up leading to large-scale violence. And the second video, which was circulating particularly in the southern part of the country, was about a criminal gang which was lynching a person alive. A person was struggling to stay alive, 4 guys standing in a circle, and one man is putting his hand inside his body and he's pulling out his organs. And it's, he's in a lot of pain, and this was a deep fake video. So these 2 videos, when they found their way to India, it was quite late by the time we realized that these fake videos were creating trouble. And when we contacted the digital platforms in this issue, WhatsApp in particular, the first response from WhatsApp was that traceability is non-negotiable. So they could not really help us in getting to the origin of the video so that we could put an end to it. And until recently, WhatsApp did not have an office in India. But the government was quite proactive. They came up with a draft intermediary liability guidelines, and the first reaction, as expected, on the part of the digital platforms was to go to court or to seek legal opinion, in terms of how to fight it, and not to, comply with the regulations, or to come to the table with the government so that we could find solutions together. It's been more than a year now. The first incident was reported last year in the month of March. More than a year now, even today, we don't have the capabilities to go after the origin of this message.
Thank you so much. Let's go around. Some of the questions were very open-ended for all the panels, actually, as a matter of fact. So, Shay, Maria, and Donara, let me bring you in here. Shay.
Sure. If it's, I'd like to relate first to what Andrea was mentioning about, okay, what's next? And I think that we're all aware that this is a very risky situation. I mean, just imagine about 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was November 2014, 2 nuclear states were almost gone into war, and it was escalate dramatically between US and North Korea regarding the Sony Bridge. So imagine where we could go from here. So I think there are 2 major things that people should do, and countries and politicians, and one, and I'm going back to what Maria mentioned before, it's about education, it's about awareness. People should be aware that that is something bad could happen, and they should be aware of different, I would say, approach and publication around it. But second, governments, politicians, they should invest some more money, and going back to some of the questions that have been asked before, they should invest some money in order to protect themselves and to protect the infrastructure in a way that today it was the other party, but tomorrow it could be us. So this is a kind of a circle that should be permanent, but it should be discriminated, and the public should not accept it at all.
No one is immune from this particular sort of assault, that's for sure. Donara.
I'd like to address your question about how we can quantify the effects of information operations and disinformation on our societies and elections. We can't. There's no way of knowing to what extent someone was influenced by a tweet or a Facebook post or a video that originated from the Internet Research Agency, the Russian troll farm, or from an Iranian information operation. Because most of the time, the content of information operations targets people that are likely to be receptive to it. So it taps into your confirmation bias and the worldview that you already have. So it's very difficult to say to what extent it can change your opinion. But what we do see is that it definitely entrenches it further. Because people that were engaging with content that was a part of an influence operation on Facebook, they were more likely to be engaging with a lot of very similar type of content and follow not just one page from one influence operation, but engage with several. So what we do see is that it definitely entrenches your confirmation bias, but to what extent it can possibly get you to get out into the streets and vote or get out into the streets and protest, we are not entirely sure. There were, however, some events that were organized by the Internet Research Agency during their attempt to influence the American elections of 2016. And as part of that, they organized these rallies in support of Donald Trump. And we managed to verify that at least 5 of those rallies did actually happen. So American voters were influenced by this influence operation to such an extent that they actually went out into the streets in support of Donald Trump. The numbers, however, were very small. There were maybe 10 people in the 3 different rallies and then 5 or 6 in two others. So that kind of shows you that there is a lot of space for this type of attack to have a very strong impact. However, it's really difficult to measure how, and yet those measurements are exactly what we need, because if we don't want to overhype it, we want to know exactly the impact that it's having. From all of the elections that we have monitored so far, we haven't seen anything like the 2016 election. So I wouldn't say that the elections that we've monitored in North and South America, Europe, and Asia in the last 3 years have been influenced by a foreign power. I would also like to pick up on your point of that recent Facebook takedown, when they took down dozens of pages that were run by an Israeli marketing company called Archimedes Group. So they were essentially information warfare mercenaries, and they were running a service that was creating fake Facebook profiles, fake pages, and fake groups in support of political parties and political leaders in Africa. And they were doing that for the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, which is very significant. And it shows you the future of information warfare as well. It's not just foreign actors, countries that are engaging in it. It's also private sector companies that are doing it, because it's a wonderful business, really, because it doesn't take a lot of investment to do that. It's a high impact, low cost means of attack. In terms of what we can do, I don't think that addressing this issue as it is right now is worthwhile, because by telling our citizens that they are susceptible to information operations, we only exacerbate the problem that is the lack of trust online and offline. And that problem is leading people from open social networks like Facebook and Twitter to closed social networks like WhatsApp. And there we can't monitor anything. We can't see what's happening at all. And it's creating a lot of limitations for researchers and policymakers alike, because if we don't know the information that our citizens are engaging with, we can't help them make better informed choices. So talking about how everyone is susceptible to information warfare and how everything you see online is likely false or is just an attempt to influence you will only exacerbate that lack of trust that we have right now that's leading to a lot of these problems. What we need to do instead is build more trust and show people how to find authentic content that's real and engaging. We need to address the underlying societal issues that are dividing us and then are exploited by these foreign actors. We need to talk to technology platforms.
Trust-building measures here, very much needed and wanted. Maria, any other questions that you want to take on? No. Samir? Very well. Then we'll go to the final three questions. I already have the 3 hands up. So right there, microphone is coming to you. Yes, those 3 hands that are up right now, you are... Go right ahead. I saw a sneaky 4th hand in the back, then coming in late. We'll see if we have time for that. Go right ahead. Yeah, why don't you do it without the mic? This is...
My question goes out to any of the panelists. One of the challenges we have is civil societies don't have a lot of trust, and the people don't have a lot of trust in government. Usually because of the incidences that we usually see. For example, we had an instance in Uganda where I don't know what part of the army or what section of the army were beating up the locals, and the army came out and said, "Oh, those are not Ugandans." It was during a protest. So do you think it is possible that we can get up and agree with the government when they tell us that the elections have been, maybe there are election issues, maybe they've been tampered with, especially since they are always at loggerheads with the civil society. They're always fighting, they are always in disagreement. Any of you can take on that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you can pass on the mic to the gentleman. Yes, right there.
Yeah, hi. Arvind Gupta from India. I have a question which is to do with what Samir briefly commented on, which is to do with platforms and their power over us. And while we all love, and rightfully so, to talk about Facebook, Twitter, and I think this whole conversation has been about Facebook. It's a company called WhatsApp, which is acquired by Facebook, and Twitter. We've seen it in India, and I've seen this throughout the last few years, while with the government also. There has been a lot of power that the platforms and technology from the Chinese side, which are influencing behavior a lot before elections start up. And I just want to know your comments on that, because these are not even user-generated content. They mask off as news. They're sitting in our browsers, and they're sitting on every single Android phone. And it's applicable both in a lot more in Africa and the Asian side. So I would like to know, what has been is there been a study, or how do these platforms influence how we think?
All right, thank you so much. Yes, go right ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zahra Maafiri, Director General of Commerce at the Ministry of Commerce in Morocco. I'm not a specialist of politics, but we have this opportunity to have these eminent experts at this panel, and I would like to know what is the future of voting. Protecting the vote, is voting going to last as a tool to choose the governor of populations matters? IT and the development of IT has affected a lot the democracy. And now populations, less and less people go into the polls to choose who is going to take care of their matters. So do you see in your analysis of data a new wave, a new trade, a new tendencies coming to show us how our population's matters will be governed in the future?
Thank you so much. I said we're going to do a final round of 3 questions. I'll make an exception because the lady, you've had your hand up, right? I don't want to overlook you. I think those 60 seconds are not going to make a difference, so go right ahead.
I'll keep it really short. The panelists have already spoken about the spread of misinformation in India. And there was a study done recently to look at why misinformation spreads. And one of the really interesting findings of the study was that people spread misinformation because it's fun. So not because they don't know that it's fake, they're able to recognize that it's fake, not because it confirms a particular bias, but just because it's fun. So I wanted to ask the panel to interpret that finding. What does that mean for how we tackle the spread of misinformation? Is that a form of political agency even? And what does that mean for kind of technological solutions to tackle the spread of misinformation?
Thank you so much. Another batch of 4 great questions that we're going to throw to the panel, which will also be the final opportunity to make your remarks here on stage. Samir, take it away.
Let me start with Arvind's point, because it kind of correlates with the intervention of mine earlier. I don't think there have been studies done to map Chinese influence on politics anywhere. although everyone would agree that it's now significant enough, and it competes with any Western source of impact and interventions. But let me tell you an incident. On end of August, 2.5 years ago, a senior colleague in the government who was supposed to travel with some of us for an international event called me and said, I may not be able to come. And I was told that as the Doklam face-off, the India-China standoff on the Himalayas, which was prolonged, was unfolding, the UC browsers, the browsers on the Android mobile phones, which is basically the preferred hand instrument for everyone in South Asia and a lot of Africa, were manipulating the order of news. They were already manipulating what you would read if you were to enter the word Doklam. So if you would enter the word Doklam on your browser, the Chinese manufactured or supplied handsets would give you a certain picture of that conflict. Now, this is one part of it. And I was then told that they have ramped it up to what Arvind now referred to as deepfakes, that there were synthetic news items which were introduced into the regular news feed. So it was very difficult to distinguish between bias reporting and completely fabricated incidents and events and discussions. So that has certainly been noticed. And I think all of us would be naive if you would assume that a Chinese platform would be benevolent and kind and the American platform would be malicious. The difference being the American platform is still owned by one company, one enterprise, subject to the writ of the law, while the Chinese platform is owned by the law. So in that sense, you can pick your own poison. Both of them coexist in certainly India, where I think we are divided into, as Arvind nicely put it, China tech, US tech, and a fast-growing India tech, an India option, which I think will also not be benevolent in kind, so that would also be naive for us to assume. So that's my response to Arvind. I don't know if that helps. On the second issue, I think you raise an important issue about the tussle between the civil society and government and the veracity, integrity, trust that people have on any electoral process. I think that's a bigger structural, systemic issue that you had referred to. And I think the technology is going to exaggerate it. It's not going to help reconcile it. So I think the reconciliation has to happen in the real world. Only then can technology aid in strengthening or promoting any form of governance outcomes in those countries. So I think you can't, hope that technology can undo the cleavages that exist in society. I think that has to be done in the real world. For that, you require real leaders, real political debates, and real civil society movements that can respond to it.